Okay, we are live. Mm. Okay, I'm gonna do a quick mic and camera check. Just want to make sure that you guys can hear me before I begin. I already see I have some viewers coming through. So just let me know in the chat section if you can hear me loud and clear. Tristan, perfect. Awesome. Thank you guys for joining. I started a little bit earlier, so hopefully it's not that bad for you. But today's stream, I'm gonna try to make it quick, about an hour. But we're gonna talk about Jeddah and the Saudi Arabian peace talks. And there's another development today, of course, with Trump. It's a never-ending roller coaster of news. But we'll talk about the latest news with regards to the tariffs with Canada, because of course that directly impacts me and my Canadian viewers, and what is currently happening because it's changing by the hour, literally. So I'll first focus on the peace talks in Saudi Arabia, and then I'll shift at the end with some final thoughts on the situation between the US and Canada. So thanks for tuning in. First of all, don't shy away from writing down the chat section where you're watching me from. And also don't shy away from writing down your questions that you may have, some comments, and I'm going to try to read them as I'm going to take some pauses. And also, if you haven't done so, subscribe to my channel and like this stream if you haven't done so. So, before I begin, Trump said that Ukraine doesn't have any cards. Well, last night, Ukraine really showed that it had many cards because Ukraine conducted one of the most unprecedented drone attacks on Russian territory and specifically targeting Moscow, the capital. So I just want to cover this quickly before I head to the peace talks. So, according to the Russians, they claim that Ukraine launched 340 UAVs against Russia. So they claim that over 100 drones flew towards the capital. And we saw, I share with you guys an image of drones striking some building. Of course, Moscow being the capital, it's probably the most heavily defended cities in Russia. So, of course, the type of success that Ukraine can have there is definitely more limited compared to other cities or other areas. But it's good to see that Ukraine pulled off this power move ahead of the peace talks and showcasing to the Trump administration that Ukraine isn't just sitting idle, and Ukraine has many cards. If we're talking with the Trump language, including Ukraine also hit several oil refineries and oil depots that were struck, and also the Druzhba pipeline was also damaged. So Hungary is crying today, saying, "Why did you hit this pipeline? We need it." But you're seeing that this has caused a lot of chaos and a lot of ruckus in Russia. So that is excellent news. So now we can head to the Saudi Arabian peace talks. Um, and what do we know? So they have officially ended. There was Yermak, there was the defense minister Umerov, and there was also from the US side, it was Waltz and Marco Rubio. So the usual people. It was the same scenario a few weeks ago when they met with the Russian delegation in Saudi Arabia. So I'm going to read out the statement that was released by both sides. And just to preface it, I think that the peace proposal went well, the process went well, and it wasn't doomed to fail. What we saw is positive progress, in my personal opinion. You guys can write in the comment section what you guys think, but let's read out what was agreed by both sides. So Ukraine expressed readiness to accept the U.S. proposal to enact an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire. So this is just for a month, which can be then extended by mutual agreement of the parties, and which is subject to acceptance and concurrent implementation by the Russian Federation. The United States will communicate to Russia that Russian reciprocity is the key to achieving peace. The United States will immediately lift the pause. This is very important, guys, here on intelligence sharing and resume security and military assistance to Ukraine. This is what Ukraine was aiming for. And so thankfully that was achieved. So the US confirms that they will resume sharing intelligence and provide military aid to Ukraine over the next few days, which is absolutely crucial. As much as we don't like the fact that the United States is playing that card of giving you something then taking it away. Ukraine still heavily depends on American help here. Unfortunately, it's still going to be the case for many years to come until Ukraine is able to be fully independent. So then they've continued on saying the delegations also discussed the importance of humanitarian relief efforts as part of the peace process, particularly during the above mentioned ceasefire, including the exchange of prisoners of war, the release of civilian detainees, and the return of forcibly transferred Ukrainian children. Both delegations agreed to name their negotiating teams and immediately begin negotiations toward an enduring peace that provides for Ukraine's long term security. The United States committed to discussing these specific proposals with representatives from Russia. The Ukrainian delegation reiterated that European partners shall be involved in the peace process. Lastly, both countries' presidents agreed to conclude as soon as possible a comprehensive agreement for developing Ukraine's critical mineral resources. So again, they agreed that this critical mineral resource deal is going to go ahead, offset the cost of American assistance, and guarantee Ukraine's long-term prosperity and security. So the statement is more or less positive. We're seeing that U.S. first of all resumed help to Ukraine. We're seeing that the U.S. is pushing for this 30-day ceasefire, and now the ball is in Russia's hands. Right? Ukraine agreed to it. They said that we're in it. We want it. And so now it's about seeing Russian reciprocity, as it was mentioned in this statement. So I think that this is a good move. Personally, it's giving a good diplomatic win for both the United States and Ukraine. Trump really needed that because he had a very bad 2 weeks where he was being called, a Russian agent, and it's still very much so in the air. I'm not saying here by any means I'm very skeptical. Of course, we have to be very careful and skeptical because we know what Trump thinks can change instantly. It can do a complete 180. But Trump really needed this quick win to present to his audience that look at me. I can get deals done, and I'm actually no pro-Russian. I'm going to put the pressure back on Russia. That remains to be seen. But this is a good win for both Ukraine and the US, in my opinion. We know that Ukraine is interested in this ceasefire. However, I need to highlight the fact that implementing it will be extremely difficult and it will be a huge challenge. And it even comes to a point of, is it even going to be feasible to actually implement a ceasefire? So that is the big question. But the very short term, it's giving a quick win because now we're waiting on what Russia is going to say. And your guess is as good as mine. You guys can write in the chat section what you think. Do you think Russia is going to agree or not? I'm more inclined to believe that Russia isn't going to agree, or they're going to pretend that they're going to be interested, but right, and there's going to be many, many conditions, but Ukraine is this, but Ukraine hasn't met that condition, and so we cannot accept the ceasefire. And Trump doesn't want that. Trump wants a very quick win, right? He's not interested in waiting it months and months and months before Putin makes a decision or he starts to implement it. He wants it to be done ASAP, right? He said within 24 hours, and Putin doesn't want that. So implementing the ceasefire will be a massive challenge. I will not lie to you guys. And so they're saying that the proposal will be passed to the Russian delegation over the next few days. Apparently, there's going to be a phone call between Putin and Trump on Friday. So maybe Putin is going to tell Trump how great of a president he is, and that he's a very smart man. And then he's going to go on a long, long history lesson for an hour. That's what I'm anticipating. But we'll see if when that phone call occurs, what is going to be discussed between both sides. But of course, now, as I've said, the ball is in Russia's territory, and so they need to now act. So that is the positive thing, is that for the last few weeks, Ukraine was the one being pressured, and now we're seeing that pressure kind of, at least for now, in the short term, being brought back to Russia. And you're already seeing a lot of outrage in Russian voinkors and Telegram channels. They're saying So what are we getting out of this if we agree? This is a total betrayal. The Americans are backstabbing us. We can't trust the Americans. So the Russians are kind of feeling the same feeling that the Ukrainians had a week or two ago. So this currently is a check situation. If we're talking, we're doing an analogy with chess. It's a check situation on Russia. They need to do a move and very quickly to show that they are actually interested in a ceasefire. Lavrov, so the Russian foreign minister, he claims that Russia will only accept a ceasefire if the root cause is fixed, whatever that means. Right? And they'll probably come up with a bunch of BS reasons like Ukraine is still a Nazi state, Ukraine needs to cede Kherson, Zaporizhia, the entirety of those territories, even the ones that Russia doesn't control, Luhansk, Donetsk, right? So whatever that means, I don't know. The root cause is fixed, said Lavrov. And it's entirely possible, as I said, that Russia is going to try to drag this out. I wouldn't be surprised. But they're in a dilemma. Putin is truly right now in a dilemma because they don't want to lose the momentum that they currently have, the small momentum, I would say, that they have right now in certain front lines, whether it be in Ukraine or even in Kursk. We've talked about Kursk. The situation is difficult for the Ukrainian forces there, but Ukraine is still holding to a certain amount of territory there. So they want to agree too quickly. So we know as well that Trump is very impatient and he won't accept this kind of carrot and the stick scenario where, Putin, I should say, says, yeah, we're interested for sure, buddy, we're in it, and then it drags on for weeks turn into months. Trump is going to get very impatient because he wants that quick win. He wants his Nobel Peace Prize. Now, before I continue, let's read some of your comments. Thank you, sir, for this, for tuning in. Bajaj Zdorovia. Quick win, all right. 3 days, all is going according to plan. Exactly, right? It turned from 3 days for Russia to fourth year. And, again, I'm very skeptical about this ceasefire. I'm very skeptical that in the short term, something is going to get done. And very likely that over the next few months, we're still going to have a full-scale war. But for now, it's a quick win for Ukraine in the short term. As I mentioned, the pressure is going to shift back against Russia. І вам бажаю здоров'я. Дуже дякую. So let's continue. So I was talking about the possibility of the Russians dragging it out. This is one of the likely scenario. It's also possible, the other scenario, that Putin could agree to it, but then in a matter of a few weeks or months after the ceasefire is applied, he'll create a false flag event like the one he did back in 2022 to drag Ukraine and Russia back to full-scale war. I think that's also a very possible scenario. And we will have to see. So this is where I'm skeptical, like Trump tries to portray himself like he's neutral. If he's truly neutral, he's going to have to apply pressure on Russia and double down on sanctions and increase military aid to Ukraine to showcase that he's not, pro-Russian. So it really depends. If we have a scenario where Russia breaks the ceasefire in any way, shape, or form, whether it be a false flag event or just decides that no, we're ripping away this ceasefire, we're not happy with it, then we have to see a true commitment by the US to follow through with what they said, with a lasting guarantee for security for Ukraine. And that will be the most important indicator over the next few months if Trump is truly neutral or he's actually pro-Russian. I think that will be the kind of final nail in the coffin, because we're seeing right now that Trump is trying to be kind of, somewhere in the middle. And if he really doesn't do anything and just says, oh, we don't know what happened, we don't know who shot first during the ceasefire, then it's clear to me that Trump is just going to try to step away from this responsibility, and he'll just throw this problem at Europe and say it's their fault or Ukraine's fault. But either way, it's going to showcase that Trump is truly 100% pro-Russian, and he's going to work with Russia first and foremost. And, again, it would essentially confirm that the US is no longer a credible mediator, right? Because right now we're seeing that the US is trying to be this in the center of everything, flying in Saudi Arabia, having a delegation flying to Moscow, to Kiev, to Europe, But if they just don't do anything, if the ceasefire breaks, then they lose that credible credibility as a effective mediator. And this is where Europe will have to take the helm, right? Europe right now is also creating their own peace plan, as we've talked about. They're the ones that proposed this initial peace plan last week when Zelensky issued his statement on Twitter. And it was a little bit different. So the peace proposal last week was in the air and in the sea. So not so much on the front line, but stopping the exchange of fire with long range drones and missiles. And this time it's a full ceasefire, from what I understand, throughout the entire front line, including Kursk. As far as I'm concerned, that also involves the situation in Kursk. So we'll have to wait and see. But I can't see the Russians agreeing to that because Putin, as far as I'm concerned, simply cannot accept the fact that even at this stage, about 20-30% of the Kursk territory that Ukraine currently occupies. So, like, let's say the 100% was like the 1,200 kilometers, square kilometers that Ukraine occupied, the height, like in early September. Now it's been reduced to 30% of that. So, around 300, 400 square kilometers that Ukraine currently has because of the massive assaults that Russia's been doing over the last few months. But even that is unacceptable for Putin. So, I can't see him in the short term to accept a ceasefire right now in the very short term. So let me read some of your comments here. I hope that this development eases pressure from Ukraine. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it will. But again, time will tell over the next few weeks what will happen and how the Russians will react to it. Knowing Putin, he's very good at managing the situation like a snake, going around things. And apparently there's going to be a phone call this week. So we'll see what is discussed and what Trump will tweet, because, of course, every single day he has to write something on Truth Social. Zelensky's back on track after a lot of bashing. Exactly. And actually, Trump said today while purchasing a Tesla in front of the White House, it was kind of funny because Tesla stocks did a massive there was a massive dip in the stock price of Tesla yesterday and even today. The stock market has not been doing well, of course, because of the tariffs. But he said that if we don't make Russia stop the fire, said Trump, we will just continue fighting. So you have to follow through with that. If you say we have to continue fighting, that means they need to continue providing weapons and assistance to Ukraine. And he also said that he has invited Zelensky back to the White House, to the Oval Office. So we'll have to see over the next few weeks what happens if Zelensky actually comes. And hoping this time it's not going to be a disaster. He can't allow this to be a disaster for a second time. If Trump provokes Zelensky for a second time, that's it, right? Like there's no going back afterwards. Right? He's going to do it a third time. They're going to have another peace talk somewhere in Saudi Arabia or Qatar, only to be re-invited again for a third time in the White House. I mean, that would be just hilarious. This vicious cycle, abusive cycle between Ukraine and the US. So it's positive too. You're seeing that even Trump has softened, right? He was saying Zelensky has to apologize. Apparently, Zelensky apologized. He wrote a letter last week to Trump. But things are positive in that regard. But I'm skeptical, as much as you guys are skeptical as well, I assume, because of how much of a roller coaster the last few weeks have been. Sniko, what is the situation with Ukrainian support from the major political parties in Canada now? Okay, so with Canada right now, we have the two main contenders. We have, of course, the Conservative Party, and we also have the Liberal Party. The Liberals just selected the new leader, Mark Carney, who is not a career politician. He is an economist, a banker that has worked in several different central banks, including the Central Bank of Canada and the UK, and also worked in the private sector as well. And he made his position very clear. He's a pro-Ukrainian. He's from Alberta, and Alberta has a massive Ukrainian population. And same with Pierre, who is the conservative leader right now. And he also, from what I remember, he's also from Alberta. I could be wrong here. I don't remember exactly if he's from Alberta, but I think he is. And most of his base is from Alberta. So Again, both of them have to be pro-Ukrainian, so Canada will not change its position in terms of help and assistance to Ukraine. Again, I also need to reiterate that Canada doesn't have much to offer compared to the United States, unfortunately. Canada doesn't have the same military size, doesn't have the same capabilities. Most of the help will come through humanitarian aid and also financial assistance and other training programs, military training programs that the Canadian military has done in the past to train the Ukrainian soldiers. I think Unifor was one of those operations a few years ago where Canadian troops went and trained Ukrainian soldiers. But I'm seeing positives as well, whether it be the liberals or the conservatives. And it's going to be a very interesting fight right now. And it's complete unexpected redemption for the liberals, right? Like Trump gifted the liberals a true path back to a possible win. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the liberals looked completely destroyed at the end of 2024 and early 2025 when Trudeau had to resign because of a lot of internal pressure. And it seemed like the conservatives were on a roll. And now it's balancing itself out to the point that the liberals could actually gain, at the very least, a minority governments because an election will be triggered likely in the next few months in Canada because Mark Carney just got appointed as the new party leader of the Liberals, and he needs to call an election to have a strong mandate, right? So, anyways, that's the little statement with regards to Canada and the current support for Ukraine. I don't see um, any negatives from that. Fracas, I think they all support Ukraine. It hasn't been a partisan issue in Canada. Absolutely, exactly. It hasn't been an issue compared to like the US or other countries around the world. Here, it's pretty stable. Canadians always side with, they're always just, in my opinion. We're a just society. There's always people, a fringe minority that will be against it, kind of emulating MAGA behavior, but it's this fringe minority in the Canadian side. Hey, Chris, the root cause, Russia will say, is Zelensky. Yeah, and that's one of the things I want to say as well. It's a good point, Kirk. That one of the main goals for Putin will be to say, look at Zelensky, he's illegitimate. They've been pushing that card heavily and that narrative over the last few weeks, saying that Zelensky is not legitimate. Ukraine needs to have elections, and of course, there's no better time to have elections than during a war. And you've been seeing that the American side has also been pressuring that narrative, but it's just impossible, right? And even during you really need to have clear security guarantees to hold elections. Like Ukraine absolutely needs to be sure that for the foreseeable short term, Russia's not going to attack again, because that would be the perfect moment for Russia during the elections when, of course, there's going to be division. People are going to side with either Zelensky. There's also rumors that Zaluzhny, the ex commander in chief of the Ukraine forces, could also run as a candidate for presidency. There's many other opportunists as well. They're going to take their chances. That there's going to be a lot of division during that moment, and that's going to be the perfect storm for Putin to, guess what, launch another full-scale attack against Ukraine. So that is a huge risk, in my opinion, when Russia is going to be pushing for that. But as far as I'm concerned, the current delegation in Jeddah from the United States did not impose that. They did not say that you need to hold elections for the ceasefire or during the ceasefire when it's going to be implemented. It's a 30-day interim ceasefire. Remember that 30-day. It's a test trial to see how it will work, and that's the right way of doing things, right? You test a little bit, you see how both sides react, and then if it actually works, then you do a 6-month test trial, maybe a year. I don't know, but that's the first. We're in the first phase right now, so we'll see how that develops. What is the analysis of which side would benefit more from a temporary ceasefire? I think both sides, for Russia, they really need a ceasefire, but I'm still seeing that Ukraine would benefit more because Ukraine right now has a lot more backing from Europe. Europe finally woke up. We've talked about in my previous live stream last week, $800 billion rearmament plan of the entire European continent. Europe is dead set at becoming now a military superpower, I guess, if we're talking about the entire continent of Europe. And, they know absolutely that the task ahead is supporting Ukraine as much as they can. Russia, on the other hand, doesn't have the same luxury. Its alliances with North Korea, with China, with Iran are very shaky right now, and it's all conditional, right? It's always based on you trade us X, Y, and Z, and we give you weapons, we give you manpower. But that doesn't mean that for Russia, it's not going to be a great moment to also rearm and, of course, recruit as much meat as possible because they're definitely going to do that. So for both sides, I see it as kind of a neutral, a zero sum game, I guess. No, it's not a zero sum game. It's more of like it's not a win win, but it's not a lose lose. So we'll have to see how it's also implemented the ceasefire, because if it's going to be successful, we also know that Europe wants to be involved and actually put boots on the ground. We'll see. Macron says that, but if he's actually going to follow through, I don't know. So I'll have to carefully analyze your question over the next few days, and I'll get back to you in my next live stream. And you guys noticed, by the way, that I've done more live streams in the last 2 months than the entire year in 2024. So just based on the sheer amount of news of events, I just can't keep up with just regular videos. Uploading like 2 or 3 times a week. I actually have to do live streams because I simply can't catch up. So I'll definitely make a live stream maybe next week, maybe in 2 weeks, and I'll get back to you with that question, because there's so many factors right now. We don't know a lot of details. And of course, what we're talking about is what was discussed in the open, but we don't know what was actually discussed in the back behind the closed doors because there's a lot of stuff and details and hidden agreements that we, of course, will maybe know in the future or we will not know ever. So, what was the other thing I wanted to talk about? I have some notes here. So if both sides agree, so that's the other scenario. Let's say if Russia actually agrees, what I'm seeing here is that the likely scenario is that the hot phase of the war will end for the short term. So maybe for the next few months, maybe a year or two, kind of a Minsk 3 scenario, but hopefully not if Europe is committed to putting boots on the ground to secure a certain front line for Ukraine. But the war will continue again in a less intense scale, like what we saw between 2015 till 2022. Cyber attacks, small exchange of fires, Russian assassinations, and it's going to be more intense in the sense that there's going to be more daring terrorist operations by the Russians, as we've seen cable cutting operations, assassinations, random explosions occurring somewhere in Europe or, I don't know, in North America, in Canada or the US, who knows? But I want to stress this. It will inevitably go back to massive full scale war. It's just, the Russians are dead set at continuing, and nothing will convince them to stop unless they're crushed, militarily speaking, and their regime collapses. I am highlighting this because it's so important. Any hope that somehow this ceasefire will bring us to long term peace, it's a pipe dream, and that's not going to happen. Whether it be in 5 years, in 10 years, 20 years, Russia's going to come back. They're going to come back, and it's on us and on Ukraine to be ready, to be even more ready. And thankfully, Ukraine will also be better equipped. So, also answering your question, Gioco, Ukraine also will be better equipped. We know that, of course, there's the long range UAV program, which has been very successful for Ukraine. Last night was, again, unprecedented. According to the Russians, they mentioned over 340 long range UAVs attacked Russia yesterday alone. We also know that the Ukrainians are developing their own missiles. It's a work in progress, especially the ballistics. But Ukraine already has several different types of missiles that it is producing in small quantities, but it can't ramp up production, especially in peace times, where there's going to be a lot more breathing room for Ukraine, a lot more funding from Europe, especially from the UK, from the coalition of the decisive that involves the UK, France, the Baltics, the Nordic countries. By the way, huge thank you to all these countries. Forever grateful. And I will name them: France, UK, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Romania, Poland, all of these countries have been so important. It's Italy, Germany, of course, even Spain. There's so many countries in Europe that are really stepping up, and I'm super happy to see that. So we're seeing that they're going to continue funding Ukraine, and that's going to help the Ukrainians build more missiles that are going to be even uh, they're going to have massive long range capabilities, and that's going to be a huge trump card against the Russians, right? Because now Ukraine won't be limited to striking 300 kilometers with its missiles, but maybe it can go as far as 1,000 kilometers and strike some of the most important airfields and oil refineries, not just small scale damage with those drones, but now massive scale damage with ballistic missiles. That could be a huge blow for the Russians if they were to start another full scale war over the next few years, which I believe undoubtedly will occur because the Russians are not interested in long term peace. And that brings me to a recent poll that came out today. And they say it's a poll that was done by the Kiev International Institute of Sociology. And that pretty much confirms the Ukrainian position as of today. They mentioned that 87% of Ukrainians are convinced, and who is surprised here, that Russia will not stop at the already occupied territories and they will continue pushing. And 66% of respondents, so about 70% of respondents are convinced that Russia aims to destroy Ukraine and its people entirely. Who is surprised here? I mean, that's as clear as day for us that that's the goal for Russia, and that's why I believe that this is not going to be a long term peace. Whatever is agreed upon between Russia and the US and Ukraine. It's just short term, providing a quick win, diplomatic win for Trump. That's what he wants right now. I'm just going to ignore your question, a YouTuber. Why don't that huge Ukraine population of Canada go and actually help their beloved Ukraine instead of cheering from safe distance and crying for help from others? I mean, you could say the same troll comment towards any Ukrainian person right now in Ukraine that's a teacher, that's a cop. Uh, you could use that same line, oh, why aren't you in the front line? Because you should understand that the war isn't just about having boots on the ground and people fighting with weapons. It's also about supporting um, the economy, the social cohesion, and all of you guys, even if you're watching from far away, from the United States, from Europe, you play an important role here. You either donate, you talk about this, and this is extremely important as well. So you can continue on trolling. I see your comments on my videos very often, but I just ignore them or I laugh it off because it doesn't work. There is a bigger population dispersed in Europe with Ukrainian passports. Yeah. I've also read that the Ukraine military complex can ramp up if more funding arrives. Exactly. And that's what we're betting on. And I think that Europe understands what's at stake here. And Ukraine has the expertise. Europe right now still is lagging behind, is way behind on many things. The only kind of country that is more or less well developed, or the two countries, are Germany and France. They have factories, but they're still producing a small scale level. We have Rheinmetall, we have Dassault, Thales. There's other companies that I forgot. And by the way, their stock prices have been going up, up, up because there's less faith in American defense, the American defense industry, which has been losing a lot recently because of the recent Trump statements. But these are the two countries right now that have some capabilities. There is also the UK, but a lot of the European countries just scaled down entirely their production of weapons because they thought that we're living in this utopic world now under the US umbrella, and whatever happens, the US is going to come and protect us. That is no longer the case, and we've seen that with the JD Vance speech in Munich a few weeks ago, that he pretty much said, "You're on your own. And unless you're paying up massive, massive amounts of money, we're not going to help you out." So Europe now is scrambling. Better late than ever, but imagine if they had been that decisive even a year ago or a year and a half ago. We would have been in a much better position right now to replace the US and kind of care less about what Trump has to say. And, say, well, sure, fine, you can stop your aid, but we can just continue helping Ukraine. All these European countries and the defense industry in Europe would have been better positioned. But thankfully, it's being done right now. Production is being ramped up, and more funding is being provided. Which obviously was my main point here: is that Ukraine already has that production, massive scale production of drones, the FPV drones. Ukraine is set to produce 3 million drones by the end of this year. 3 million, maybe more. It could even blow that if we continue on supporting and donating to the Ukraine cause. But yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of positive here. Okay, so this brings me to so that was pretty much the thing I wanted to talk about. My kind of quick analysis of the situation between the Ukrainian and the American delegation in Saudi Arabia. You guys can let me know if you have any other comments or questions with regards to that. Chris, you realize that Ukraine was supposed to be a neutral country in the beginning, right? The beginning of when? 2022? Because yeah, we do remember that there was a first initial meeting in Istanbul back in March of 2022, if I remember correctly, a few days after the war started, the full-scale war, and Russia just imposed just maximalist conditions on the Ukrainian delegation. They really believe that they pretty much said that Ukraine needs to demilitarize, have a maximum military of 50,000 soldiers, renounce the entirety of Eastern Ukraine, if I remember correctly. Like be neutral, never be part of NATO, just like completely destructive conditions. And thankfully, Ukraine didn't agree. And that was the weakest time for Ukraine. Like Ukraine was in the weakest position at that moment where the world was just like thinking, oh my God, like Ukraine's going to fall. It's barely weak, but we're looking at a map that is becoming more and more red by the day. And Ukraine didn't agree, thank God. But yeah, I do realize that this was the whole plan, and Europe was watching kind of over the parapet and seeing, maybe Ukraine should do that. We're not really sure if Ukraine's going to hold it out, and they were kind of holding on the aid because they weren't sure if Ukraine would actually fall. They didn't have any trust or belief. So that's what we saw, those 5,000 helmets from Germany in 2022, if you guys remember. Not to be offensive to Germany, but that is literally an indication of how Europe saw Ukraine at that moment. They didn't think Ukraine would last even a week. And quite frankly, the entire world didn't believe that. I did. I personally did believe that. I knew that Ukraine would put up a massive fight because I am Ukrainian, and I know that in us we have a very big spirit, and heroism and courage is part of our DNA as Ukrainians. And we hate injustice. We hate moments where we just start being the victims, and we take action when our freedoms are taken away. And if you look at the Ukrainian history, time and time again shows how the Ukrainians have been fighting this David versus Goliath story constantly. It's always been the same, right? Fighting against impossible odds. Not saying that Ukraine always won, but Ukraine took those chances at every opportunity you could get. So that is really a wonderful story. That we're in the fourth year of this war, this full scale war, and Ukraine is still holding out and capable of destroying bring colossal losses to the Russian military. It's a true victory for Ukraine already. No, in 1991. I'll have to check that, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there was any agreement that Ukraine was supposed to be a neutral country in 1991. Then it was the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, which guaranteed Ukraine security, but there was no such agreement. Apparently, the Russians say that there was some agreement that Ukraine can never be part of NATO and blah, blah, blah. But that was refuted in what was agreed upon between the Russians, the Americans, and the UK. So I don't see where Ukraine was supposed to be neutral. And again, telling a country whether they should be neutral or not, again, it's just against democracy. It's against our core beliefs for you guys, my audience that believes in democracy and the values. Like, who am I to tell another country what they should or shouldn't do, right? like who they should vote for. I can have my opinions, of course, but it's not up to me to tell them how they should live their life. And neither should, countries like Russia tell the Ukrainians where they can gravitate to. Unfortunately, we live in a world, pragmatically speaking, that is not like that. We have to realize that, we have superpowers like China, like the US, that can impose their will, unfortunately. But I still am very centered around the belief that it's not up to countries to decide the fate of others, right? So yeah. So that brings me to the last thing I wanted to talk about. And that is the Trump insanity with tariffs against Canada. So the last few days have been pretty up and down in terms of the tariffs. Now, I have to preface it that tensions have cooled off in the past hour. There's been a call between Canadian prime ministers, especially the Prime Minister of Ontario, Doc Ford, and Lutnick, whatever his name is, the Secretary of Commerce, Nutnik, and they had a call, so it cooled off. But essentially, last night and this morning, Trump just went complete deranged mode on Truth Social, and I'll read out what he wrote a few hours ago, because Ontario said that they would impose 25% surcharge on electricity to Minnesota, New York, and I believe Michigan as well, if I remember correctly. And that just turned Donald J. Trump into a madman on True Social. He said, "Why would our country allow another country to supply us with electricity, even for a small area? Who made these decisions and why? And can you imagine Canada stooping so low as to use electricity that so affects the life of innocent people as a bargaining chip and threat? They will pay a financial price for this so big that it will be read about in history books for many years to come." So the stock market obviously didn't behave well after seeing this Truth Social post by Donald Trump. But thankfully, after that, cooler heads prevailed, and there was a call between Doc Ford and the US administration, the Trump administration, and Ontario suspended its promise to add a 25% surcharge on exports of electricity, saying that they had a productive talk, a productive conversation about the economic relationship between the US and Canada. And so now the US and Canada are going to meet. The officials are going to meet in Washington to discuss the future in the wake of repeated terror threats. And they're set to meet on Thursday. And in return, Ontario agreed to suspend 25% surcharge. And of course, it's going to be with the federal Canadian federal government as well. That's going to go to Washington. But man, this is just crazy what we're seeing right now with the US threatening Canada with tariffs, but also annexation. It's downright crazy to see this disrespect by the Trump administration. Um, and as I said previously in my live stream last week, the US position as this top defender of democracy and the fair, kind of just global sheriff has completely vanished in less than 2 months. The Canadians forever will not trust any future American administration, even if they're Democrats. Unfortunately, that trust has been completely destroyed. And the problem is that this is not just if Trump doesn't win, or he can run for a third term technically, but we never know with the current conditions. Because by the way, I forgot to mention that this is a good one. Where did I read this? Where is it? The U.S. was added to the global human rights watch list over declining civil rights. So we don't know what's going to happen, but technically Trump can be running for a third term. And he has created a culture. Let's face it, Trump has created MAGA culture over the last 10 years. There's many people that are going to try to emulate him. And so that threat is always going to be present, right? Whereas it's going to be a very rude, um, certain population in the United States that are going to be very chauvinistic and think that our way or the highway. And that's the problem about the Republicans. Their problem is that they think that the world revolves around the United States and the Republican Party. Like they see a world in a certain way, they think it works like that, and they just say, oh, we'll just threaten countries, weak countries, we'll put threats, tariff threats, and they'll just cave in because we're the US and we can do it. So why not? Well, guess what? Countries like Canada or the European Union, they just say, okay, well, we're not going to kneel. We're going to impose our own tariffs on you. Yeah, it's going to hurt us, but we're not just going to kneel because you're just behaving like a superpower and you can do whatever the hell you want. And that frustrates them because you've seen in the last couple of days, the stock market has been just doing abysmal. And Trump himself tweeted back in 2012 on Twitter that if the Dow Jones Exchange Index Fund drops below 1,000 points in less than 2 days, any president should be impeached. Well, that's what happened and what's going on, right? So, of course, not that Trump really cares about what he said 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but they're just so pissed because things are not going their way for the Republicans and Trump. And the more they fail and the more frustrated they get with the lack of results that they were expecting, the more they double down, right? And they say, oh, screw it. We're going to continue because we're the United States, because admitting that they're wrong is seen as weakness. So, in any situation like these ones, well, I'm seeing the proper way of doing diplomacy with the Trump administration is to always leave them a door open, a way out where they can look good. Unfortunately, right? We're seeing that with Zelensky, with sending a letter of apology, praising Trump. There's different ways that you can do that, but you always need to have an open door for the Trump administration so they can say, "Oh, we won here," right? Like, yeah, sure, things didn't go like the way we planned, but we won. We won. That's the most important. They always need to be saying that. And maybe they can even invent wins, but they need to have that kind of small avenue out. And unfortunately, it's just a battle of egos. You're seeing that Trump is putting his ego above the lives of hundreds of millions of people in North America, whether it be Americans or Canadians. He's impacting the lives of regular people. He could care less about small business owners and ordinary Americans and Canadians. Well, not that he would ever care about Canadians, but as the president of the United States, at the very least, he could care about ordinary Americans. He doesn't care. Uh, Thank you for joining, Gia. Peace. Kirk, Goliath is no more. Russia is using donkeys. Zelensky didn't need a ride. Exactly. We're seeing, again, Russia is in this dilemma. They need a ceasefire, but at the same time, they don't want to lose the momentum. And now they have to use donkeys and horses. So which avenue they take, right? That's the big question. Knowing Putin is very good at, figuring a way out of bad situations, but this is one that's going to be very problematic for Putin. This is proof you need the hard stance against Trump. Yeah, exactly. And whatever happens, at least Canada showcased that they're not about to kneel in front of a bully and blackmail. That's really important. You're seeing that that's frustrating Trump because he thought it would be just as easy as 25% tariffs, border tsar, do this and that. And it's just not working for him, right? Um, at this stage, I mean, we have to just assume that there's no logic behind, there's no plan. It's just pure stupidity. He's just going day by day with his actions, unfortunately. And unfortunately, I do believe that Trump is surrounded by some capable members in his administration, but they're just such sycophants. They're such yes men, right? They're they're so scared to speak up. I truly believe that. Whereas in his first term, why things were more or less, I'm not going to say stable, but okay, right? It didn't end up in a total dumpster fire like it is right now, is because he had people in his administration that were willing to speak up and challenge him. That's the most important thing about democracy, is that a president or a leader needs to be challenged. There needs to be a balance of power. We're not seeing that right now. He's surrounding himself with just yes men and sycophants that, even if they know that the current situation is horrible, they're just going to smile like this and say, yes, Mr. Trump, you're doing a great job, and applaud. Unfortunately, right? So that's the biggest problem right now, is that he's just surrounded by people that are unwilling to tell him the truth and they're scared because whether it be career ambition, whatever, maybe they feel it's too early to do that. So that's the big problem right now. And again, in terms of tariffs, trade is fundamentally about cooperation, right? You need to make sure that both sides are willing to work together. And when you have one side that is constantly blackmailing, constantly bullying the other side, you're just going to push them away. That's what I'm saying, that Canada and the US, their relationship is never going to be the same ever again, ever, at least for the next generation or two. We will never trust the Americans again because we saw how, how this current administration and possible future administration can just rip off contracts, rip off agreements whenever they like, and say, Trump is literally doing a blueprint of that, showcasing that this can be easily done if you have the majority everywhere in Congress, in the Senate, and of course, the majority of the population voted. So this is problematic, but that's the reality of things. And thankfully, the silver lining is that this makes the Canadians realize we have an opportunity here to take advantage of the situation, grow a stronger economy that is more independent, strengthen our ties with Europe, European Union, South American countries, with Asia as well, Japan, South Korea. There's a lot of opportunities, and bring Canada even more towards a leadership role, because right now Canada has always been kind of this kind of you know small brother to the US, and they never kind of took big decisions. But this is an opportunity for us as Canadians to do that. So we'll have to wait and see. Time is going to tell us what's going to happen. But I have a lot of optimism for our country. Parles-tu français? Oui, je parle français. I had to learn the meaning of the word sycophant since Trump came into office. Yeah, it's a good word. I like it. I also learned it recently too. So you're in the same boat because I was like, I kept hearing sycophant. And I'm like, what is that word? And I did a quick Google search. And I'm like, that perfectly fits literally the entire Trump administration. It's a good word because there's yes men, but sycophant is a better term. Fracas, first dawn, that tariff is the threshold tariff. It's only present if American dairy floods the Canadian market. It's never been applied. Yeah, I'm not really too much of an expert in terms of like the tariffs and how if when you're mentioning first dawn, do you mention the tariffs that happened back in 2018, 2019? Um, because that's what Trump right now was talking about as well, like the 350% tariffs on dairy, whatever that Canada applies or something like that. Um, but the whole story is the main point here is that you can always make a deal with the Canadians, right? We were willing to compromise. We saw, if you guys haven't seen, the Canadian government prime ministers flew back and forth between Ottawa and Washington and met with Trump in Mar-a-Lago, exchanged notes between the US and delegation and the Canadian delegation, right? Like they were willing to find a solution over the last 3 months. And, the US simply wasn't interested in doing that. So, you know, that's the thing. Okay, so we're reaching the 1 hour mark. I know we weren't that many today. I think because I started a little bit earlier. Usually later there's more people that join, but yeah, I just wanted to talk over about the Saudi Arabia peace talks. It's positive in my opinion. For the short term, the pressure is going to ease off on Zelensky and the Ukraine, so that is positive. We have also um, the aid, the military aid, and financial assistance and intelligence sharing is going to resume as well. So that is also another positive for Ukraine. And the pressure has shifted back at the Kremlin, and so we'll have to wait and see over the next few days what the Kremlin will say, what they will do, and if they will actually commit. I'm very skeptical. And I'm also very skeptical at the levers that the US will apply against Russia if they decide to not play ball with these peace talks and these negotiations. So, thank you, guys. A huge thank you for joining. I'm very grateful for all of you. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, please subscribe. I'm always super thankful for your support. It keeps me motivated to continue making live streams, videos. I'm really, really thankful for that. And it gives me that energy to continue on. I have some more projects down the line. I'll share some more updates with you the near future. But that's the live stream from today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And Slava Ukraini. Thank you so much. Cheers, guys.